In the beginning of our program, we began to tell you Niagara's story, and now it's time for us to complete it. It's my distinct pleasure to invite Dirk Ficke to the podium to introduce 4 people whose lives have been impacted by the Niagara Foundation. Please welcome Dirk Ficke.
How do we put the meaning of civility back into civil society? By definition, civility is not something you can legislate, but civility is something that can be cultivated. And crucial to that cultivation is the practice of hospitality. And when one thinks about hospitality, one thinks of the host offering hospitality to the guest, of the long-standing resident offering hospitality to the newcomer in town, of the citizen offering hospitality to the immigrant. What's curious about so much of the experience and practice of hospitality that has been expressed in the metropolitan Chicago area over the past 10 years is that it has come from a group of relative newcomers from Turkey who have in so many ways served as hosts for the rest of us. The Niagara Foundation comes by their reputation for hospitality honestly. Their sense of human relations is rooted in a Turkish culture that starts with a greeting of peace and a cup of tea. Their ethic of respect comes from the example of Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, for whom hospitality was not an option, but a holy obligation. But in a U.S. culture where hospitality is often viewed as an unnecessary obstacle to efficiency, and the bottom line tends to matter more than the value of friendship, it's no mystery why cynicism often trumps civility. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, this Niagara Foundation, it just seems too good to be true. What are they really after? Is it so hard to believe that there isn't another agenda? That hospitality can be offered simply for its own sake, with no strings attached? We have an interfaith activist to tell you a story about that.
So, Sharif Bey and all of the staff, I congratulate you on this marvelous occasion. And to all of the award winners, Sunil Bey, Tom Bey, Kate Hanim, congratulations. We're very proud to be associated with an organization that's associated with you. I moved here from Atlanta, Georgia in 2006, and I got a phone call while I was still unpacking my books and my study in Crystal Lake. Do you know where Crystal Lake is? It's a little ways out there, and the call was from a Kamal Bey, somebody connected with something called the Niagara Foundation, which I thought was Niagara Falls or something like that, and he asked if I wanted to be his neighbor. And I said, I don't know what you mean, tell me. He said, well, it's a Turkish custom, but we'd like to bring you some pudding. This is a very bizarre phone call. I said, okay, you want to bring some pudding so I can be your neighbor. What does this mean? He said, well, I mean your church. We'd like to know, the Niagara Foundation, would you like to be our neighbor? Because in Turkey, on Ashura, we bring Noah's pudding. And he began to explain this to me. Okay, that sounds like a lot of fun. He said, so how many families do you have? I said, well, on a given Sunday morning, we might see 300, 400 families. No problem, he said. This just doesn't compute in my mind. But on the coldest day in January, the very coldest day of my life, these cars drive up to Crystal Lake, and out comes all of these bowls of pudding into our church. And it was fantastic. It was wonderful. And along with them, some wonderful people from the Niagara Foundation. They came and they brought the pudding to share with us. And we invited them to stay for worship. They came into our worship center, and we happened to be singing from our hymnal, and our hymnal was opened, and on the facing page of the hymn we were singing, no plan here, were the 99 beautiful names of God. And they saw that and called our attention to that, and what a glorious moment of coming together of two cultures. It was just the beginning, and it just has continued to grow and to grow and to grow. So then I was invited to come down and participate in lunches and breakfasts and Abrahamic dinners and awards things, and we've become a family. I mean, this is exactly right, and hospitality is the word that we have received. Meanwhile, back in Crystal Lake, a local rabbi, Marilee Gordon, and I were trying to build an interfaith coalition. People didn't know there were other faith traditions there. And we were working at that, and who became our ally right away but Niagara Foundation? On Columbus Day, we decided it would be a nice thing to do to have a potluck, an interfaith potluck, in a suburban clubhouse. You have to see this. 75 people come, and the room just smells to heaven with incredible cuisines from around the world, and half of the people who were there were Turks, I think. Half of them were from Niagara Foundation. Half of them, and the food they brought, you can imagine, right? You can imagine. And so they helped us get that off the ground, and we began to talk about what it means to be interfaith, and we began to organize interfaith out there in Crystal Lake. And before you know it, we get another call. I think it was Kamal, but it might have been someone else, Kamal Bey. But it was, by the way, we have these whirling dervishes coming from Konya. Would you like to have them in Crystal Lake? And I know about the dervishes and thought this would be a great opportunity. And so, of course, we said yes. And so we were able to bring the dervishes to Crystal Lake. But most people in Crystal Lake didn't know about dervishes. And so they were expecting sabers and all kinds of wild dances. Didn't happen. It was at the Rao Theater, and it was a crowd, and we got to talk about Sema and Sufi prayer and spirituality. It was another wonderful teaching moment. It just happened. But what really was so remarkable is that Niagara has been continually out there in Crystal Lake supporting and encouraging the kind of interfaith things we did. We had a Niagara Festival, Niagara FCC Festival, and Niagara came out, and we had Jesse White's tumblers, and we had Hebrew art exhibits, and we had all kinds of food, and we raised money for Turning Point, which is a shelter for homeless women. And we built community. In many ways, we feel like Niagara is our partner in the city and in the area. We've started something called Faith Bridge, which is a really remarkable interfaith effort in the Fox Valley area. And we do now an annual Martin Luther King Interfaith Prayer Breakfast and a faith-to-faith, face-to-face 2-year certification program in interfaith studies for lay people. And we've worked with Shakila Hassan on the Sounds of Faith and all kinds of things. Niagara is always there. Niagara's on the board. Niagara's buying a table at the Martin King dinner breakfast. They're always there. I could go on and on and on to tell you how remarkable it is. My church now is very, very honored and pleased to sponsor an iftar during Ramadan every year. I think it's going to be June this year. I think we're looking at it. And the last time we did this, we were so happy to have Niagara there and Islamic Foundation North and American Muslim Community Organization together and argue about when you could eat the date. All of that. We discovered that if you look out the front door of the sanctuary from the front of our church, you're facing Mecca. Isn't that something? So we are just so grateful to Niagara for bringing us to life, to interfaith life, to spiritual life. And if you visit us, you will see the 99 names of God in our chapel, carved in beautiful wood from Turkey that were presented to us by Niagara Foundation. We presented to them a calligraphy from St. John's University of Benedictine values, and thus the story continues. Thank you so much for your hospitality.
Serving in the global interreligious movement for 20 years and journeying around the world, I've come into contact with Islam in many different cultural contexts and different diverse expressions of belief and practice. And by virtue of that experience, I've come to know and respect the Ummah as one of the most peace-loving and morally disciplined religious communities on the planet. Unfortunately, in so much of the news media and the uninformed popular perception, the image of Islam has been hijacked by an extremist element of 2%. When there's a terrorist attack, these extremists don't need a public relations firm to get out their distorted message of hate. The global media does it for them. Meanwhile, the other 98% of the Muslim world faithfully practicing their tradition is simply not news. Over the past 2 decades, the Muslim community in metropolitan Chicago has striven to counter this image. It has patiently and quietly worked to take its rightful place in the broader society with an appropriate view of the rights and responsibilities that go with that. And one expression of that is the Niagara Foundation. On the one hand, Niagara sees itself not as a religious community, but an organization of civil society. On the other hand, it is upfront about being informed by values central to Islam and shared with peoples and communities of other cultures and traditions. One evening last year, I attended a conversation on the Asiatic side of the Bosporus in Istanbul. This was a gathering of middle-class Turkish businessmen associated with the same movement that Niagara is associated with. Each week, these brothers in the movement gather for dinner to read and discuss the works of Said Nursi and Fethullah Gulen, and to work on their next project, building a school or a hospital, organizing a business association. Over a meal of soup and bread and tea, one of these businessmen said to me, "Fethullah Gulen has enabled me to be a faithful, practicing Muslim in a modern way." This is a side of the story about Islam that needs to get wider press. Here is a community activist to tell you such a story.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, and I want to congratulate the Niagara Foundation and all of you for this auspicious and historic event celebrating this incredible decade of effective activism and work that both the Niagara community and you have been involved in. I'd like to kind of discuss this issue from a little bit of a different perspective, and that is from a perspective of my own tradition, which is rooted in a story that's told in the Quran in chapter 2, and known as the creation story. The creation story whereby God is about to create human beings. He's about to create Adam. And he discloses this to the angels. And the angels become rather alarmed and surprised. And they ask God, why are you going to create a creature that is going to cause so much bloodshed and create so much chaos on the earth? God gives a very interesting answer, which has been the subject of much commentary and speculation by Muslim theologians. And he says, I know what you do not know. I know what you do not know. I first met members of what came to be called the Niagara movement, about 14 years ago. I went to an academic conference, and there was a bookstall which was selling various books. And being the busy guy that I am, I stopped by the table and looked at the books, and I asked, "Who are you and what are you selling?" And they said, "Have you heard of Said Nursi?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of Said Nursi. Who is he?" And by this time I had finished my master's and I was teaching adjunct. And I said, "I'd never heard of Said Nursi. Who is he?" They said, "Here's a book. Start reading." And I read a few pages and I was so taken that I signed up for their mailing list to a magazine called Fountain Magazine, which some of you may be familiar with. A year later, I received a postcard inviting me to a seminar on science and religion. And this was interesting because in my experience growing up as an American Muslim, the intersection of science and religion did not occur at the community level very often. So I went and attended this, and I heard two very interesting speakers. One was a professor from John Carroll called Zeki Zerpetrick, and also a professor called Alp Arsaladin. And I was so fascinated by the discussion of this in the sense that they talked about how in today's world, the intersection of religion and science must come together and converge so that one complements the other. And I became so excited that I invited them over for breakfast the following day. And oddly enough, they accepted because they were coming from out of town, so I was very happy that they came. So next day, they came to my house and we had breakfast. About 6 months later, I received a call from a guy named Kamal. Never heard of him. And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "Oh, I'm friends with those three guys that you invited for breakfast." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Have you heard of the Whirling Dervishes?" I said, "Yes, I have. Would you like to come see them at the Chicago Theater?" I said, "Absolutely." I've only heard about Whirling Dervishes. If you study academia, you just know they're like they kind of spin around in medieval times, and they kind of were shut down when the Turkish government took over in the 1920s. And they're coming to Chicago, and they're going to perform. So I went, and I saw Marcia and others, and it was just a fantastic experience, incredible, mystical, spiritual, uplifting experience. About 5 months later, I get another call. "Who is this?" "This is Kamal." "What do you want?" "Would you like to go to Turkey?" And I said, "Look, I'm really busy. I'm a practicing lawyer." And I said, "I've got my family." And he said, "Well, your wife can come too." I said, "Okay, I'm in." That was in 2004. And it was in that trip that I went with some very important friends and colleagues who are sitting here at my table and elsewhere around here. And it is that trip that really, I would say, highlighted the experience that many of us had with the Niagara Foundation. But more importantly, I knew some of my friends here. I knew Stan Davis. I knew Scott Alexander. But the experience of leaving our hometown of Chicago and going abroad to discuss issues of religion. We all had to deliver papers at that time. And it was a very important conference in Mardin and Istanbul. But the most joyous occasion for us was the bus ride at 2 o'clock in the morning from, I think it was Ankara to Istanbul. And just sharing that and enjoying that experience and then coming back, did a couple of things. Since that time, I've had the opportunity to visit and speak at Stan's church and have gotten together with Scott to work on a whole host of different issues. So one of the things that Niagara does, as some have already mentioned, is that they build bridges. Some of you who have gone and visited Turkey have seen the Bosphorus and a beautiful, huge bridge that covers, at least two of them cover the Bosphorus. But what Niagara Foundation does is covers and provides a bridge for Americans to things that they ordinarily would not experience or see. And that's something truly that I appreciate. And that's something that when God told the angels, "You do not know what I know," is that despite what we see around us today, despite the difficulties, despite the tragedies that we see in the news, particularly lately in our countries, from St. Louis to New York and of course overseas, is that human beings have the capacity to build better bridges. They have the capacity to do good. And Niagara Foundation, in fact, has the audacity to do good despite these weaknesses, despite these challenges that we as Americans, as members of the human village, continuously witness and see. And it is in this experience of doing goodness and demonstrating hospitality, love, compassion, all these attributes are what the angels, when they learned that God was going to create human beings, did not see and did not understand. And this is a reminder for all of us that despite what we see around us, despite the challenges, that we do have in our midst the human potential to transcend even the level of angels so that we can make this a much, much better place. And in conclusion, I simply want to thank Sharif and Hakan and Hilmi, and particularly their wives and their family, for allowing them to take us to Turkey, to come to the program, the various lunches and activities, etc., that they do, because that's a tremendous sacrifice. I'd like to give them an opportunity, if we can all give them a hand and help the families of Niagara who supported them for all these years. Finally, these attributes, love, compassion, hospitality, particularly when it comes to food. The only complaint I guess I would have when I have visited Turkey and also my engagement with Niagara for the past 10 years is I think I've gained at least 10 to 15 pounds eating all this tremendous Turkish food. But these attributes that I mentioned, love, compassion, hospitality, they're rooted in the tradition as it has been outlined in the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, which we see in the traditions, which we see then being emulated by important scholars like Jalaluddin Rumi, who is the founder of the order that's known as the Whirling Dervishes. And finally, we see it in the teachings of Said Nursi, who is the teacher of Fethullah Gulen. And that's being reflected in Fethullah Gulen's teachings, and which is now being reflected in those who follow his teachings, particularly the Niagara Foundation. So I'd like to thank you once again, and congratulations on your 10-year anniversary, and may you all go in peace.
One of the most important dynamics in any civil society is trust. And a fancy term for engendering trust is second-tier diplomacy. It's the face-to-face encounters, the bonding experiences, those rare moments of meaningful and respectful dialogue that create the trust necessary to do then the tough work of first-tier diplomacy, finding agreement, negotiating differences, reducing tensions, promoting the common good. Because of second-tier diplomacy, we know ahead of time who to call in a crisis. Because of second-tier diplomacy and the trust it engenders, they will take our call. Think of the difference that would have made in Ferguson. Over the years, the Niagara Foundation has provided so many opportunities for all of us to engage in second-tier diplomacy, leading to countless friendships and scores of fruitful partnerships and constructive endeavors. Where else in metropolitan Chicago does this array of the community come together and come together in this way? We have a public official who has a story about that.
Good evening, my friends. I'm Chicago City Clerk Susana Mendoza. It's a pleasure to be here tonight in the company of such wonderful people. I want to congratulate all of the honorees, and I'd also like to give a special hello to two of my very important mentors, Ann Pramaggiore and Chairman Ed Burke. They've been very, very influential in my life, and I love you very much. I'd also like to say a special hello to my Turkish friends, of which there are many here, but in particular Hilmi, Hakan, Sharif, and all of your beautiful families. I can honestly say that my very first Turkish friend was Hilmi. Back in 2008 is when I met my first Turkish person, I think, and happens to be a dear friend. And most of you know who Hilmi Çınar is, but he's obviously with the Niagara Foundation. But I had never heard the name Hilmi before. So in an attempt, as a good politician, right, to remember people's names, I kept saying to myself, it's kill me with an H. And truthfully, I've never forgotten it since. So if any of you are having a hard time with Hilmi, just remember, kill me with an H. Which is funny because he's probably the biggest pacifist I've ever met in my life. But prior to meeting Hilmi and being introduced to the Niagara Foundation, I had no true understanding of the Turkish culture or its people. I, like many people in the country, had a fundamental misconception of what the country was like and knew next to nothing about its Muslim faith. Back when I was a state representative and as the chairman of the International Trade and Commerce Committee in the state of Illinois, I led a delegation of representatives to Turkey. That's when I met Hilmi. And that trip opened my eyes to the impressive reality that is Turkey, a country rich in history, culture, unbelievably beautiful scenery, and most impressive of all, a people so kind and warmly hospitable that it became a place that I would return to often and encourage others to visit always. Some of my most memorable moments were when I had the pleasure of breaking bread, much like we did tonight, but in the warm and cozy homes of Turkish families who welcomed us into their home with open arms, open hearts, and open minds. The Niagara Foundation is a jewel within the city of Chicago, and that jewel brings together people of all nationalities, occupations, religions, and diverse points of view, and as such, encourages dialogues of peace that bring out the best in all of us. So I want to just say thank you for sharing your friendship with me, for making me feel like I'm a part of this beautiful and huge family of yours, and congratulations on the most momentous occasion of your 10-year anniversary. God bless.
There was a time in the Olympics when the U.S. basketball team was made up of amateur college players. These were young and unpaid athletes who considered it their patriotic duty and honor to represent their country on a global stage. Then in 1992 came the Dream Team, professional athletes making their living playing basketball who are now called upon to represent the U.S. in the games. And again, the mantra we heard from them was the pride they felt in representing their country. But in the most recent Olympics, there were grumblings among some of the professional athletes and the owners of the team they played for that they should be financially compensated to represent their country at the 2014 Games in London. Is there nothing left that's worth doing for its own sake, apart from the financial bottom line? Is the only aspirational language to be found in the public discourse today in commercials? When was the last time in the election cycle that you heard the equivalent of John F. Kennedy's "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country"? When was the last time anything was asked of anyone for the sake of the common good on behalf of the broader society? And how has it come to the point that those engaged in public service, teachers, police, firefighters, social workers, community activists, invite so much scorn and suspicion. Let's not have any illusions about everyone out for themselves as an approach to society. Such an approach will not create a civil society. We're only going to do that by reclaiming a more altruistic set of values and inspiring the next generation of young people to see public service contributing to the common good as a higher calling, worthy in its own right. This is one of the crucial challenges that the Niagara Foundation is tackling. And we have a story from a student and a future diplomat.
Quite the intro for an 18-year-old kid, I would say. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jack Harrington, and once again, it's an honor to be here tonight celebrating the Niagara Foundation's 10-year anniversary. So to start off, let's just give another round of applause to these great men and women who do such a fantastic job. A couple weeks ago, I got a call from Hilmy asking if I would want to speak at his 10-year anniversary. And I said, of course. They've given me so much, so many great experiences. I'd love to give back. Little did I know he would place me speaking directly after the eloquent city clerk and great friend Susanna Mendoza, so thank you for that, Helmy. To give you a little background on me, I'm an 18-year-old senior at Barrington High School. I play soccer competitively and spend my great sport and spend my free time outside of that running my school's government and working on political campaigns. As you can imagine, my parents are huge fans of my political junkiness, so love you guys. I first got involved with the Niagara Foundation a little over 4 years ago during a trip to Turkey. The Vice President of Niagara, Helmi Chinar, led the trip. Since those 8 days, my life has changed dramatically thanks to this wonderful organization. Through the great people who run the Niagara Foundation, I have been introduced to and immersed in cultures not normally experienced by a teenage suburban kid. One of my favorite experiences on my first trip to Turkey was going to an Istanbul family's house for dinner. The people were wonderful. The food was even more wonderful. I think everyone who's visited Turkey knows that. Just a great couple hours of wonderful conversation and great food. And the hospitality of these people was so great that at the end of the night, they brought my mother over to the side away from the group and asked if they would be interested in marrying off their son to one of their daughters. So, as far as the hospitality of Turkish people and the Niagara Foundation, I don't think you can find anyone more hospitable. I'm still thinking about it, by the way. But on a serious note, through these experiences, my worldview has widened greatly, while simultaneously shrunk. And what I mean by that is that through my time with Niagara, I've gained a better understanding of the world and its cultures, while my perspective on the world's people has become grounded in an ideal I think we all share. The ideal is simple. You can get along with anyone, anywhere, no matter what faith or ethnicity they are, as long as there's understanding. I feel so blessed to have been taught this by the Niagara Foundation. Their mission statement, to promote social cohesion by fostering civic conversations and sustained relationships between people of different cultures and faiths, inspires me. It inspires me to the point where I hope in 10 years I can be fulfilling this mission. Since my time spent with the Niagara Foundation, I've become obsessed with foreign policy. Yes, obsessed. It's the right word to use. I dream of working in the State Department where I can help bring cultures and people together. Obviously, that's a long ways away for me. But for now, I'll do little things like teach my history class about the Kurdish ethnicity when the project assigned is supposed to be about U.S. history. But this is what Niagara does. They teach and connect people on a large scale. and inspire others to do the same, even if it's on a smaller scale. So, Hilmi, Hakan, and Sharif, thank you for inspiring the suburban middle schooler from Barrington 4 years ago to do greater things. And congrats on 10 fabulous years. I look forward to spending more years with you guys. Mashallah.
Just a closing thought. The inspiration for tonight's gathering is an aging Islamic scholar from Turkey named Fethullah Gulen, who today lives in 2 rooms in a modest house in eastern Pennsylvania, where he prays, teaches, writes, and worries about the world. Fittingly, the movement he has spawned does not bear his name, but the Turkish word that captures its essence, hizmet, meaning service. Whatever influence Mr. Gulen has or has ever had is solely a matter of hearts and minds. It extends only as far as his ability to persuade people to live by an altruistic set of values, to believe that virtue is its own reward, to embrace the truth that it is not ideologies or systems or the profit motive that ultimately holds the world together, but rather the unconditional regard for the other. Inspired by the Hizmet movement, the dedicated founders and professional staff, advisors, and volunteers of the Niagara Foundation has been working in our midst for the past 10 years. And given the unique character of their mission, what has brought us together tonight is not simply to be talked about, admired, and celebrated. The work that they do with us on our behalf also makes a claim on the lives of us around these tables, insomuch that we are, each of us, weavers of the fabric of our communities, that we are collectively responsible for the civility of our civil society. To whatever degree there is to be goodwill and resilience in the metropolitan community to meet the challenges that diversity and disparity present, it is up to those of us who live here to embody it, to cultivate it, and to make it real. Fortunately, we have a shining example of how to do this in the Niagara Foundation. Look at those around you. Where else does this array of metropolitan Chicago come together in this way? You know, Tip O'Neill famously said, "All politics is local. So is hospitality, and so is friendship." Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of the Niagara Foundation for being with us tonight. Congratulations to the honorees, and good evening. I'd like to invite the honorees and the award presenters to the podium for a group photo. Good night.
I thought it was a wonderful evening. I was told that the turnout was over 800 people, and even more impressive was the fact that about 2/3 of them had not interacted with the Niagara Foundation before. So I think it is a very successful evening for Niagara Foundation because they were able to engage so many new people who will get to know more about the foundation and get involved in its activities. And I think that's good for the Niagara Foundation and good for the city of Chicago. I enjoyed learning more about the Niagara Foundation. I enjoyed learning more about my fellow awardees.
Just how really humbled I am that the Greater Chicago Food Depository would be singled out for this distinction. You know, we have so many amazing organizations in our community, and hearing the dialogue tonight and the work of the Niagara Foundation, I'm really grateful that the Food Depository would be considered among the many great organizations that have come into the orbit of the Niagara Foundation. And I think for us, it's a recognition not only of the strength of our community and of people coming together and having dialogue, but frankly also the importance of thinking about everybody in a community and thinking about not only our neighbors who have lots, but also our neighbors who are struggling. And so we're grateful for the chance to talk about that this evening and to reflect on the work that we do in partnership with others. I was so delighted we were able to bring volunteers with us. And so first of all, it was just such a pleasure for me to get to sit with people who make our work possible every day, but then also to get to meet many new friends in this room this evening and hear about the work of Niagara and have the chance to have dialogue and talk about how together we can create a stronger Chicago and frankly a stronger world.
I think tonight is a great event, bringing people together from a diverse and just really interesting background. And I think what the Niagara Foundation is trying to do is to perpetuate that. And it's just really wonderful. Very, very wonderful night.